fellowship. My stubborn will at last have yielded. I would be thine and thine alone. And this the prayer my lips are bringing, for within me thy will be done. Sweet will of God, still call me closer till I am wholly lost in thee. Sweet will of God, still call me closer till I am wholly lost in thee. I'm tired of sin, but sore and weary, the darksome path and dreary road. But now life has risen to cheer me. I find in thee my star, my sun. Sweet will of God, still hold me closer till I am wholly lost in thee. Sweet will of God, still hold me closer till I am wholly lost in thee. Shut in with thee, O Lord, forever. Went out a friend, he sought to pay it all.
Test. We're good? Okay. All right, so I guess we'll get started. It's good to be back with you guys after a little bit of a break, and just want to say thanks to the elders for covering for me for a while. I really appreciated the break, so I appreciate that. So we're in Daniel 7. I know it's been a little while since we've been in Daniel. Let me just make one public service announcement. If you have a kid that's supposed to be in Mr. Jamie's class tonight, he is sick. So they're somewhere wandering about the building or hopefully in a class. So a lot of them are down front. So if you don't know where your child is, you might want to go find out if you don't see them up here. Anyway, so Daniel chapter 7. So this part of Daniel starts the apocalyptic section of the book, which a lot of people find very difficult. The first 6 chapters are mostly historical with a couple of visions that the text explains to you what the visions mean. So just a kind of quick recap of the book, because I know it's been a few weeks since we've met. So if you remember, chapter 1 is basically talking about Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being taken from Judah to Babylon, and then the training and stuff that they received there. Chapter 2 is the first dream of Nebuchadnezzar, which we'll talk briefly about that because that dream's going to come up again tonight. So in that dream, Nebuchadnezzar saw a statue. The head was gold, the chest was silver, the thighs and pelvis area were bronze, and then the lower legs were iron. And that represented 4 different kingdoms. The head, which was gold, was Nebuchadnezzar himself and the Babylonian kingdom. The chest, which was silver, was the next kingdom, which was the Medes and Persians. The bronze area was the following kingdom, which was the Greek Empire. And then the iron, the last kingdom, the Iron Kingdom, was the Roman Empire. And so that was all explained in chapter 2, but that same theme is going to come back up here in chapter 7. Then you get into chapter 3. And that was where Nebuchadnezzar makes the golden image. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do not bow down to it, and then they're put into the fiery furnace. Chapter 4 is Nebuchadnezzar's second dream, and then he is made to act like an animal for a period of time as God tried to humble him. Chapter 5 is later on down the line. At that point, Nebuchadnezzar's dead, and Belshazzar is king of Babylon. And chapter 5 is the very last night of the Babylonian Empire before the Medes and Persians come in and destroy them the next morning. And that's the handwriting on the wall incident where Daniel interprets that message for him. And then chapter 6 is when you move from the Babylonian kingdom to the kingdom of the Medes and Persians, and Darius is now the king. And Daniel was a chief official also in the Persian Empire, and he is accused by some of the other leaders of the empire that are jealous of him, and that ends up leading to Daniel getting thrown into the lion's den and surviving. And so that's where we left off in the account of Daniel. So we'll start tonight with chapter 7. And so chapter 7, even though it's after chapter 6, the events, the vision that Daniel is writing about actually occurred before chapter 5, and he's going to tell you that in the very first sentence of the chapter. So as you look at chapter 7, verse 1, it says, "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon." So remember, Belshazzar is the king in chapter 5, and he's telling you that this vision he's going to see, that he's going to tell you about in chapter 7, he actually saw this and wrote it down during the first year of the reign of Belshazzar. So this would precede what we read about in chapter 5. Okay. So Belshazzar, just a quick recap, he is the last king of Babylon. He's the son of another king. They kind of ruled together, but his father was not very popular, and nor was Belshazzar for that matter. And he's the one from the handwriting on the wall incident from chapter 5. But you don't really need to know him for this chapter. You just need to know when this occurred. So the first year of his reign, Some people dated it 753, other people say 750. Probably 750 is the better number. So he's telling you that he saw this vision in 750 BC, okay? So he saw this actually before, while Babylon was still the world empire, before the Medes and Persians came in and conquered Babylon, okay? Now there is another significant incident that happened in 750 BC. In that year, Darius, who was over the Persians, defeated his grandfather who was over the Medes and brought the Medes and Persians together as one empire. So in 750, Babylon is still technically the world empire, but the Medes and Persians are coming together as one, and they're going to end up taking over the Babylonians as the world empire in 739, so 11 years later. Okay, so in verse 1 it says, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. So Daniel tells you up front that he wrote this chapter. He wrote down what he remembered from the dream or the vision. And so we at least know that he wrote this chapter. However, the writing of this chapter is very similar to the rest of the book, which suggests that he probably wrote the whole thing. But at least we can say he wrote this chapter. Okay, so he sees a vision during the night, and then he writes it down sometime later. All right, so verse 2, Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. So I'm using the New King James just to teach the class. And so you're starting to get into the vision now, and the whole rest of the chapter is the vision, except for the last verse. So everything you read from here on out, just bear in mind, it's all part of a vision. So some of it, a lot of it's symbolic, some of it's, well, most of it's symbolic, but some of it's slightly more literal. So you have to start asking yourself, what does all these different things mean as you read them? Some commentators will go off the deep end and try to interpret every single detail. In reality, every detail is not meant to be interpreted. Some of them are, some of them aren't. You kind of have to weigh which ones are relevant. So what he's saying here in the first verse of this, in verse 2, he says, behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. So the four winds of heaven, when it says heaven, it means the heavens, like the sky. It doesn't mean heaven where God lives. So that's one thing. So the four winds of heaven, that basically probably means four directions, so east, west, north, south. In other words, the whole earth is stirred up into chaos, is what it's talking about. You can see commentators that'll say it means other things, but that's probably the safest interpretation. It's just to say that basically all the earth is stirred up, and there's chaos happening, and something is going to come out of the Great Sea. And then you have to ask yourself, well, what is the Great Sea? Okay. The New King James does something I don't really like here. It capitalizes Great Sea. So if you're using that, you'll notice the G and the S for Great Sea are capitalized. What that is a translator's prerogative to basically tell you what they think this means by doing that. And so the phrase Great Sea, a lot of times in the Bible, will mean the Mediterranean Sea, okay? And so when they capitalize Great Sea here, what they're trying to tell you is they think this represents the Mediterranean Sea. But I'm going to go with a different direction on that. It probably better is interpreted as it's the Great Sea means all of humanity, okay? So what is, and you'll see this, and it'll make more sense as you get down into the vision later, but something or someone is going to come up out of the Great Sea. And when you start reading about who and what is coming up out of the Great Sea, they're not coming up out of the Mediterranean Sea, okay? So it'll make more sense as you get deeper into it. But for now, realize he's not talking about something literally coming up off the shore of Crete and crawling up onto Israel's banks or something like that. He's talking about chaos across the world, and it's stirring up all the people across the world. Okay, and that's more of the gist of what's talking about here. All right, so verse 3, it says, and 4 great beasts came up from the sea. So in other words, there's 4 beasts that are going to come up out of the sea, each different from the other. So in other words, if you can interpret the sea as people, all the people of the world, 4 beasts are going to come up out of humanity, basically. And what you realize later as you read on, the 4 beasts are 4 kings. So it doesn't really make sense for 4 kings to pop up out of the Mediterranean Sea like Aquaman. It's talking about 4 people arising up out of the total of humanity, and the kings represent their kingdoms as well. So, all right. So this is where it starts going back to chapter 2, and you have to remember the imagery of chapter 2. So in chapter 2, you had a statue. The head was gold, and that represented Babylon. The chest was silver, and that represented the Medes and Persians. The waist was bronze, and that represented the Greek Empire. And then the legs were iron, and that represented the Romans. Now you're going to read about 4 beasts, but these beasts are the exact same as the 4 elements of the statue earlier. So if you remember the statue, then this will make sense here too. Okay. All right. So he's going to describe these 4 beasts now. And I'll just mention this now, and we'll talk about it probably next week. So I'm not going to get into it probably this week. Probably won't have time, but next week I'll start tying this. So everything he talks about here in this chapter is talked about again, but greatly expanded upon in Revelation. Okay, so he's giving you the Cliff Note version of this. John is going to give you the full description in Revelation. Okay, so why is Daniel giving you the short version, John giving you the full version? Because Daniel's an Old Testament prophet. He's seeing the future, but he's only seeing a glimpse of the future. Whereas John has lived through some of this, or some of it's already in the past, and then the rest of it remains in the future. But God shows John a lot more information than he shows Daniel. So Daniel's showing you a bit of the information. John will show you a lot more of the information at Revelation. And probably next week I'll start showing you where the same stuff occurs in Revelation, so you can kind of look it up later, but we probably won't have time to do that tonight. Okay. All right, so if you look at verse 3, it says, 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. All right, the first was, and he's going to describe it, but just remember, the first one is Babylon, just like the head of the statue was Babylon. So the first one's going to be Babylon. And remember, when he received this dream or vision, was when Babylon was still the world power. If you look back at verse 1, this is during the first year of King Belshazzar of Babylon. Okay, so Babylon has not fallen yet when he sees this vision. All right, so verse 4, the first was like a lion. And so Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar are described as being like a lion in multiple places in the Old Testament. I think Jeremiah refers to him that way several times. So he's referred to that way before. And so it says the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. And so what that's telling you is 2 things. One, the Babylonian Empire is a very strong empire, a very ferocious empire, but the eagle's wings also suggest that it moves very rapidly. So when Babylon first became the world empire under Nabopolassar and then followed by his son Nebuchadnezzar, they did spread very rapidly and got very large quickly. And that's what this is alluding to. So they're a lion in the sense that they're very strong and very powerful, but they're an eagle in the sense that they've spread and moved very fast, okay? And so that's what that part of the imagery is conveying. But then as you look in verse 4 in the middle, it says, I watched till its wings were plucked off. And what that means is Babylon is going to reach a point, and they're already reaching it as he sees the vision, where they quit spreading and their power starts to diminish. So when an eagle loses its wings or its feathers, it can't fly anymore. And in the same way, Babylon is going to lose its speed that it's going to spread, and it's going to start to diminish over time. And so Belshazzar, who's the last king during the time that he receives this message, is a bit of a dud as a king, and so Babylon is already in the process of dwindling down, even at the point that he receives this message. Okay, so going on to verse 4, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Okay, so a couple things here, and you'll often see commentators mess this up too. So, I mean, it's okay, but so it's trying to give you an inverse picture of what should be. So for a human, we should stand upright on 2 feet and think like a human, right? But if you're an animal, you should be on 4 legs and think like an animal, right? Okay. So when you go back to the story of Nebuchadnezzar, when he had his delusion and thought he was an animal, he went from being an upright human on 2 feet, thinking like a human, to being down on all 4 and thinking like an animal. But the imagery here is the opposite. It is an animal that should be on 4 legs because it's a lion, and suddenly it stands up on 2 legs and doesn't think like an animal anymore, it thinks like a human. So it's doing the opposite of what it should. But unfortunately, a lot of commentators see this the other way around. What this is referring to is when Nebuchadnezzar does have his delusion, because he's not operating the way he should. He's operating like an animal. In this case, the animal is operating the opposite of it should, like a human. But some commentators will say, oh, this is when he got his mind or his sanity back. No, it's the opposite. It's when he loses his sanity because he's not functioning like a human, and in this case, the animal is not functioning like an animal, okay? And so that's what this is referring to. The other issue here is the New King James, it says, and a man's heart was given to it. Technically, the Hebrew word there is heart, but you have to realize that a heart often stands for someone's mind or intellect. And so that's why most other translations will say it was given a human's mind, because that's really what it's talking about. It's not talking about it having a human's heart to pump the blood around. And so probably the New King James could have probably went with a better route on that one, but that's okay. All right, so that's your first beast. So the first beast is Babylon. And so it has some descriptors in there to let you know it's strong, but it's going to diminish in strength over time, okay? All right, so you move on to the next beast, which is the verse 5. And suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear. It was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, arise, devour much flesh. Okay, so this one is a bear. This is the correspondence to the chest of the statue from chapter 2. So the chest in chapter 2 is silver, and it represents the Medes and Persians. It's the same thing here. This is the bear, but it's the Medes and Persians. This is another one where sometimes commentators mess it up. It says the bear was raised up on one side. Some commentators take that to mean the bear was standing on its hind legs. And that's not what it says. It says it's on one side, which means it's either its right side is up higher than the left or vice versa, okay? So it's not on its hind legs, it's leaning to one side or the other. And what does that mean? It means one side of the empire is stronger than the other. So you've got the Medes and Persians together. The Medes are weaker than the Persians, okay? So the Persians are the stronger half of the empire. The Medes are the weaker half of the empire. And so that's what that's referring to. And then it says it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And then it gets a message that says, arise, devour much flesh. So a couple things here. It doesn't say who tells the bear to go devour much flesh. The implication is it's probably God telling the bear to do this, but it doesn't say that for sure. But the whole idea with all these beasts is that they are servants of God in the fact that they're accomplishing something that God wants to be accomplished, but they are not agents of God. And what do I mean? What's the distinction there? An agent of God would actually do God's will and do what God says and act on behalf of God, whereas someone or something that's just accomplishing something God wants to accomplish without them even knowing that they're doing it can do a lot of damage and a lot of harm along the way because they're not actually an agent of God. In other words, an agent of God should do what God wants willingly and as perfectly as possible, whereas you might call it maybe a servant's not a good word, but someone doing God's will without knowing it can accomplish God's will, but they can wreak a lot of havoc and make a lot of mistakes in the process. And that's kind of what these empires are doing. They don't realize that they're working on behalf of God, but that's what they're doing, okay? So what does it mean when it talks about the 3 ribs in its mouth? Ribs come in sets, right? So humans have 12 ribs on each side. But the bear has 3 ribs in its mouth, so it doesn't even have 2 full sets of ribs. So what that means is it has strength and it is devouring, but on a limited basis, okay? So it doesn't devour the whole thing, it doesn't eat the whole thing, it only eats a limited part or what God allows it to do. And so it's showing you that its strength is present but limited, and it'll be limited for a period of time, okay? All right, so verse 6 goes on to the next beast. After this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Okay, so a couple things about this. So this corresponds to the waist area of the statue, which was bronze, and the upper thighs, which was the Greek Empire, and so this is the same. And so let's look at a couple things. So it says it's a leopard, and it has 4 sets of wings on its back like a bird. So a leopard is fast, and then obviously if you strap 4 sets of wings on a leopard's back, it's going to make it even faster, right? So what is this alluding to? Well, when Alexander the Great took over, in a 10-year period of time, he took over the entire known world at that time. He defeated the Persians and then took over basically the whole Mediterranean area and the ancient Near Eastern area. And so he did all that in 10 years. And so that's what it's alluding to, is that this empire is going to move much faster than the other empires. It's going to be stronger, and it's going to move quickly, but it's also kind of going to burn out pretty quick too. So Alexander's troops revolted after 10 years, and then he died. So even though he conquered a lot and did it very quickly, it was kind of a short-lived reign. But if you notice this beast, let me mention too, it says it has 4 heads, and what that means probably is that if you have 4 heads or a face on all 4 sides, it's like the 4 winds mentioned earlier, where it represents the directions of a compass. The 4 heads means this beast is looking to expand in all 4 different directions. So it's trying to take over the whole world by going in each of the 4 directions on the compass. But if you notice in the last segment of verse 6, this beast actually has dominion given to it, and that's not mentioned for the first 2. So God allowed this beast to have some dominion or reign, control, whatever you want to call it, for a period of time. And so that's a little different than the first 2 beasts. All right, and then verse 7, and then it says, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast. Now, the 4th beast is very, very different from the first 3. One, it doesn't have any description about it, like it looking like an animal or anything like that. So that all that stuff that you saw for the first 3, you don't see any of that for this one. Instead, it's kind of described more in terms of how it made Daniel feel to see it than what it actually looked like. Okay. So in verse 7, it says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, And then it's going to describe kind of the emotions that it brought up for Daniel to see it. Dreadful, terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. And that goes back to the statue. If you remember the statue, the lower legs and feet were the Roman Empire, and they were made of iron. And so here it says that its teeth are made of iron. And then it goes on to describe how it behaves. It was devouring, it broke into pieces, it trampled the residue with its feet. And so it's given a lot of power, but it's very destructive with the power it has. It's not very conscientious about what it's doing. It's just taking over a lot of people and land and territory, and it's just doing a lot of destruction along the way. And as you keep reading, it says it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And so this is the Roman Empire, and this is where commentators start going all over the place. They try to identify what are these 10 horns, and then they start trying to make it into 10 different Caesars or 10 different sub-empires that kind of splintered off when the Roman Empire broke up, or all these different things. But let me just show you something real quick, if I can find it. Let me look in here. I want to show you that this isn't a literal number. It's a figurative number. Okay, if you look in chapter 1, verse 20, so in chapter 1, verse 20, Daniel isn't even talking about apocalyptic stuff at this point, but he says, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all his realm. So when he uses the number 10 there, what does 10 mean when he says they're 10 times better? Are they literally 10 times better, or is it just an expression? It's an expression, right? Okay, so when you flip over here and you're reading about these 10 horns, does it literally mean 10 somethings? You have to decide what the somethings are. Or does it just mean it's a lot of strength and power? So a horn, when you're talking about apocalyptic literature, a horn means strength. So if an animal has a horn of some sort, then it means it's strong. If you have 10 horns, that means you're super duper strong, okay? And so that's what this is referring to. You don't have to try to make it more complex with trying to, do mental gymnastics about how many Caesars were there and all this stuff. Just that the fourth beast is very strong, okay? So it has 10 horns. And so verse 8, it says, I was considering the horns. So if you notice, he goes through the first three beasts pretty quick, but he gets hung up on this fourth beast. It really caught his attention, and the horns in particular are what catches his attention. And he's going to dwell on this for quite a bit. So verse 8, I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one. So you started with 10, and now you're going to have this 11th, if you will, little horn that's going to spring up. And it says it's coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. So basically what is happening is you have 10 horns, but this 11th horn, this little horn, is going to spring up and kind of knock off 3 of the 10 horns. But what this symbolizes is whatever we decide this little horn is it's going to take some of the power from the 3 horns, which in turn means it's taking some of the power from the Roman Empire, okay? All right, so this is kind of going to become the main focus of the rest of the chapter is this little horn. Well, not entirely, but a big point of the rest of the chapter is what is this little horn? What is it doing? And if you notice, it does give you a little bit of a description here. It says it has the horn itself, the little horn, has eyes like the eyes of a man and a mouth speaking pompous words. And that's to let you know that this represents a human of some sort, whether it's a specific individual, a group of individuals, a type of individual, and we can decide that later. But for now, the fourth beast is the Roman Empire. It has a lot of strength as indicated by the 10 horns, but something is going to pop up out of the Roman Empire that also has strength. It's going to take strength from the Roman Empire, and it's going to be composed of a person or persons, and the person or persons is going to speak a lot of, according to the New King James, pompous words. And so we'll have to figure out what that means, okay? All right, so if you move on to verse 9, so what's going to happen now is the vision is switching. So it's like he's looking over here at the beast, and then something else catches his eye over here, and so he turns his attention to see what's going on over here. And so now you're going to be introduced to some new characters in the vision. And it says, I watched till thrones were put in place, and I'll just go ahead and tell you, verses 9 and 10 is about the heavenly council. And then you have to ask yourself, who's in this council? What do they do? All this kind of stuff. All right, but quick note, if he saw thrones put into place, how many thrones are there? Minimum. At least 2, right? Okay. Now, how many there are, we don't know right now, okay? It doesn't say. It just tells you there's at least 2. It's not a single throne. There's at least 2 thrones, maybe more, but at least 2. Okay, so it says, I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. All right, so now you have a new character, this individual known as the Ancient of Days, and so we'll have to decide who this guy is. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. All right, so this one shouldn't be too hard to figure out who this might be referring to. So this would be God the Father, known as the Ancient of Days. And there's really not much debate on that one, on who this individual is. All right, so as you look at it, it says his garments were white as snow. That's repeated in Revelation. Hair of his head is like pure wool or white, also repeated in Revelation. Christ's hair is also referred to as white in Revelation. And so the idea of the whiteness represents holiness. And so what it's saying is this individual is holy. And so he's going to be seated on a throne, which indicates he has power. The whiteness indicates that he is holy. And then it's going to say that his throne is a fiery flame and its wheels a burning fire. And so that indicates power and so forth as well. Now the wheels, what does that represent? Why would a throne have wheels? Where are the Jewish people at when Daniel is receiving this vision? They're in Babylon, in captivity. And so the other prophet that mentions a throne with wheels is Ezekiel. Where is Ezekiel prophesying from? Babylon. Okay, so both Daniel and Ezekiel mention a throne with wheels, and they're both prophesying from Babylon while God's people are in captivity. And the point of God's throne having wheels means that remember the ancient Near Eastern philosophy of gods, or deities, is that the deity only had power within the borders of the country that you lived in. So Yahweh would only have power in Judah and previously Israel. Marduk would have power elsewhere, so Marduk would be the god of Babylon, or one of them. He'd have power only in Babylon. But the idea here is that God's throne has wheels, meaning God's power isn't limited geographically. His power can move around. His power can move from Judah over to Babylon. And the point of it is God's power and control is everywhere, and it's everywhere that his people exist. And it's meant to provide comfort to his people that it doesn't matter where you're at or what horrible regime you live under, God is in control, he is all-powerful, and he will protect his people and be with his people regardless of where they are or the circumstances of it. And so that's the point of the wheels on the throne. Okay, verse 10, a fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. So in other words, this fiery stream is coming out from the throne. So if you can kind of like imagine like a little stream of molten lava or whatever kind of emanating from the throne. And these are his judgments, is what this represents. So the judgments of God are going to come out from his throne like a little lava flow, basically. So remember what the scene is here. This is the divine council, and they're making a judgment on something. But whatever they're judging about, the judgments are going to pass forth from the throne like a stream of fire, okay? So it says, a fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. Sorry. The court was seated and the books were open. So this is a courtroom scene in heaven. So now we have to ask ourselves, who are these? 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. These would be the angels. And it's important to know who these individuals are and who they are not. And so some commentators will try to say that the angels are part of the divine council and they sit on the thrones as well, and they help God with his judgments. But that's not what this says. It says that the thousands and 10,000s, what are they doing? Are they seated or are they standing? They're standing. They're not seated, okay? All we know right now as far as the thrones is God is on one throne and there is at least one more throne, okay? Right now we don't know who's on them, but that's all we know. But the angels are standing. They are not seated, okay? And so they are not part of the divine council in terms of making decisions. You can think of them as the waiters and the butlers, if you like, but they're not making decisions. They're there to, bring the Diet Coke to God. So that's what their role is. All right. So the divine council has met. They have made a judgment. The judgment is going to flow forth like a lava stream from the throne. But what did they make a judgment on? Well, that's what we have to keep looking at. Was that the first bill? Okay. All right, so verse 11, I watched them. This is Daniel's talking about the divine council. No, I'm sorry, he's talking about the beast now. So he was looking at the beast, then he saw the divine council over here. Now something caught his attention. He's going back to look at the beast again. All right, so he said, I watched them because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. So this is that little horn that's got a big mouth, okay? And he's saying ridiculous stuff. It says, I watched till the beast was slain and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. So now you know what the judgment from the divine council is. The judgment from the divine council was, we're going to slay the beasts, specifically the fourth beast, okay? And so that was the judgment from the divine council. And they're going to slay the beast, destroy its body, and throw it in the burning flame. Does that sound like anything from Revelation? We'll get more into this next week, but there are two major beasts in Revelation which are slain and tossed into the lake of fire, okay? And so that's a preview of what John's going to talk about in Revelation, okay? Verse 12, as for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. And so what that means is, so for instance, when Babylon was conquered by the Medes and the Persians, that means they lost their dominion or their power, but they failed to exist as a people anymore. No, I mean, they're under the control of another nation now, but they're still a group of people, right? They just don't have power anymore. And so then when the Medes and the Persians were knocked off by the Greeks, by Alexander the Great, did they cease to exist, or did they just not have power anymore? They just didn't have power anymore. And same with the Greeks. When the Greeks were defeated by the Romans, it's the same thing. So do these people still exist today? Yeah, they do. I went to residency with a guy from Iran, and he was super fast to tell you he was Persian. I mean, he would tell you in the first 2 minutes you met him, he was Persian. All right. Very proud of that. I'm not Arab, I'm Persian. It's a big distinction. And so these people still exist. Persians still exist. Greeks still exist. Romans still exist. Babylonians are Iraqis. They still exist. But they don't have the power that they used to have. Okay, and so that's what it's saying. Is they still exist, but they don't have the great power that they once had, okay? And we'll get into the next section here just to kind of read it, but I know the bell's going to ring before we really get into it. All right, so now, he was looking at the beast for a second. Now he's going to flip back to the divine council, and we get a new character. All right, so verse 13, I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. Okay, so just a couple of things. I'm sure you can figure out who this is, but just a couple of things to kind of think about as you're thinking about who this is. One, was anybody referred to as the Son of Man in the New Testament about a zillion times, either of his own referencing or other people's referencing? Two, how many people can approach the Ancient of Days directly? Three, he has his own kingdom, and he's given his own dominion, but unlike the four kingdoms that preceded that existed and then didn't exist, his will last forever, okay? Not forever in terms of human time, but forever in terms of eternity. He also receives worship. And so as you kind of think about this for next week, obviously, who does all those things apply to, and who is the only person that those things could apply to? But one last thing is the phrase Son of Man indicates that he is human, but it says he's like a son of man. So he has human attributes, but at the same time, he is much more than just a human, okay? So as you kind of ponder all that for next week, we'll get into it next week. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions before we stop? All right, go find your kid.